Okay, so hi everyone, thanks for staying and listening to our presentation. I'm Hannah, one of the learning designers at King's, and I'll be presenting with my three colleagues who will introduce themselves as they start talking. So we're going to talk to you about some of the ways that we've introduced AI into our learning design processes at King's Digital. We started thinking about this work sort of more in a more kind of directed, meaningful way towards the end of last year. So I'll talk about some of the exploration that we did, but then trying to save as much time as possible for the three case studies. So I wanted to start just by setting the scene a little bit and highlighting some of the overarching questions that we've been asking ourselves as we've been working through this, and sort of taken from just this wider, broader conversation around AI in higher education more generally. So the first is just thinking about the rapid evolution of Gen AI in higher education, how it's moved from a bit of a novelty, even just last year and before, to now something that's just really widely used. And then within that, thinking about how we can stay current, aware of what's possible, and making sure that we're making the most of it. And secondly, innovation and rigor, and thinking about balancing that and working out how to enjoy the benefits of Gen AI whilst maintaining high academic standards. Thirdly, human contribution in this Gen AI era, and working out how to maintain that connection and collaboration between ourselves and any Gen AI tools in a meaningful way. And then lastly, asking ourselves how we can be responsible with our usage, environmentally, ethically, and so on. And with that, thinking about how we can measure our impact. And if anyone is doing this, we'd be really keen to hear, because we're currently not, and not sure how to make progress on that just yet. So what we set out to achieve, we set ourselves these kind of two very straightforward goals. So one was to understand the learning design team at King's Digital's feeling towards and use of Gen AI, including any appetite for further adoption. And then from that, to identify where in our processes Gen AI might be of use, and then share best practice ways of working back with the team. So before I talk about some of our findings, I just thought it'd be helpful to give a brief overview of our production process. So for all program development, we run through these 4 phases. So from kickoff through ideation, production, and then into delivery and evaluation. But yeah, we thought, so we kind of took that process and tried to figure out where would be the most beneficial from a learning design perspective to think about Gen AI use. And really for us, it was these 2 stages in the middle, so ideation and production. For us, the ideation phase is a space where the academic and learning designer get together and spend time thinking about the structure of the modules, the pedagogical approach, the assessment, and so on. And then the production phase is a bit more of the doing phase. So the academic will be writing content handovers, we'll be storyboarding, there might be some filming and other media preparation going on. So we were looking in these 2 stages for ways to maybe save time and find efficiencies, and if not, thinking about maybe ways that we could be improving the quality of our output. So yeah, the case studies in a minute show a bit more about that. So we did a few conducted some surveys and held a couple of focus group sessions, again just with the King's Digital learning design team. There's around 15 of us, so it's quite a big team. And we wanted to understand how colleagues were using AI, if they were using it, and if so, how, and if they weren't using it, why not? And we were really interested in the results more generally, but just particularly the sort of diversity of the response. So in the yellow segment, that's everyday usage, versus the sort of similar size red segment, which is not using it at all. And so to give a sense of the themes that came through more generally, both from those surveys and the focus groups. Firstly, colleagues highlighted the importance of protecting human creativity. We talked a lot about sort of valuing that nuanced academic interpretation alongside any Gen AI use and sort of protecting that. The need for clarity and guidance. Team members wanted clear, tailored guidance on how to effectively integrate any Gen AI into our processes. And then lastly, and this was just a really key finding we felt, was the importance of maintaining space for a flexible approach. As that pie chart showed, not everyone was on the same page. We wanted to save space for that really, and not be forceful in our recommendations or anything. So my last slide before I hand over. So just thinking about taking this forward, and from those findings, we distilled down some priority areas that we felt we could take forward, and then colleagues, we sort of through conversation and another survey, we landed on these two as the first two that we would take forward. So firstly, to develop Gen AI usage guidelines that accommodate diverse professional values. And secondly, create custom tools to empower learning designers to use Gen AI in their work. And I just wanted to mention one of the ways that we thought about and went about producing guidance was actually just to start collating examples, build a space for that, encourage colleagues to add their examples to that. And in that way, that kind of library becomes a bit of a living and evolving guidance space, because we were finding it's actually very challenging to write guidelines for something that's just changing so quickly. I think that's all I'll say. So I'll hand over to Wenjing, who's going to just offer some kind of general good guidance on how to get started using AI, and then we'll talk a bit about prompt writing and how to analyze outputs.
Hi, my name is Wenjing. I'm also a learning designer at Constitutional. So I'm going to briefly share how I've used Gen AI to support storyboarding for our online course design. Storyboarding is really just an everyday task for learning designers. We take materials for academics and structure them into learning activities, content assessment. One common challenge for us is to balancing the quality and tight timeline. And we often have to spend a lot of time reading the materials, reviewing the process, and then make decisions on what needs to go into the storyboard. And this is where I think we could experiment using AI. AI could quickly process a lot of information, but it can give various level of outcomes. So rather than trying to figure out how to use AI to produce the final storyboard, we use it for ideation, to ask AI to review the academic materials and then generate ideas and questions to support the storyboarding process. There are two practices I found very important in this process. One is to ensure transparency and accountability. So before the production, I discussed the use of Gen AI with academics. In our learning design workshops, we decide we're going to use Copilot as our model, and we agree that kind of any use of Gen AI in our lessons will be acknowledged. And then we'll review any AI output, make sure that it's all reviewed and edited by a human. And then second is to really keep the human judgment throughout the process. I'll show the steps in just a second. The first thing I do is to kind of reflect on my own process and then break down the workflow. For example, when I storyboard, I often start with reviewing the learning outcomes. I'll ask questions such as, are the learning outcomes clearly defined? Are they aligned with assessment? Are they appropriate for our learners? Are there any gaps in their learning outcomes? So those are just like questions I'll ask myself when I review. And these really helps to break down the decisions and then reduce the number of decisions that AI has to make, which are often not very good. And once those decisions are clear, I ask AI to process them. by writing the prompt. And there are a lot of different tools on the internet can help you write prompt, but I find it very useful to just start with something simple. The general principles are just provide context, because AI does not have the knowledge and information we have, and be specific and iterate when the outcomes are not useful. And I am going to share just a simple example using the very simple CRAFT framework, which stands for context, role, action, format, and target elements. You'll have to read the screenshot because I'm going to explain kind of the example. First, in my prompt, I will include the learning outcomes, the assessment, and just to provide some context about the materials. For example, the materials is for introducing students to security and privacy issues in a context of cybersecurity. And then I'll ask AI to act as a designer and review the materials, specifically the learning outcomes, and with the questions I just shared with you to kind of go through. And then in the response, I will specify AI to give me very concise answer with 3 options each time. So just to leave room for me to go back and then select the ones that I found relevant. And last but not least, I describe our learners are master-level online students who are driven by applicable, authentic learning, but very limited in their time. So they appreciate very clear instructions and clear structure for them to navigate the learning. And within seconds, I got a list of suggestions from GenAI. Before reviewing the GenAI output, I did a quick look at the materials to just make sure I understand that before looking at AI output. And then by reading through those suggestions, I can quickly see that some of them are just not relevant to the course material, but some of them are worth considering. So I went back to look at the course materials. For example, there's one that points out that there's these key mindsets related to the course assessment. So these help me to identify areas that I could address in the story report, and those I send back to the academics to review. But this is of course not like a straightforward process. It definitely is like an iterative process. Sometimes I need to go back and tweak the prompts a little bit to get better results. And there are also kind of different ways you can customize the tool. It depends what you use. For example, this is Copilot. It allows you to choose different models to give you either a quick response or think deeper. For ChatGPT, you can also choose style or tone that you want the AI response to be. I sometimes choose the efficient one, but you may prefer it to be give you a warmer response or more sarcastic. It depends on what you need. And this experiment really helped us understand the potential of using GenAI in our learning design process. We really want to use GenAI as a collaborative partner, not to replace learning designer. And it's really important to reflect on our own process and understand the limitation and capabilities of AI before making any decisions. And looking forward, we will continue to explore different ways to interact with AI to make the process more efficient, effective, and at the same time, take responsibility of reviewing and using GenAI outputs more effectively as learning designers. Next, I'm going to hand over to Jessica. She's going to share her example of co-designing with GenAI while maintaining partnership and collaboration with academics.
Afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm also a learning designer at King's College, and today I'm going to be sharing an ideation and co-designing process I went through with one of the academics I was designing a short course with. I think it would be pertinent to open my case study with a quote from an influential voice, Rose Luckin. She is a specialist in the field of AI and education, and something that she highlights is just how crucial it is to balance, or to strike a balance rather, between leveraging AI's capability as well as preserving the unique human touch in education. Now, ultimately, it was this balance that helped shape every single decision I made when are made about how and when to involve Gen AI in the process that I will be outlining for you. It's essential to start off by just giving you a little bit of a brief about the course that I was working on. Basically, it was a course that focused on, it was an edX course. It was designed for self-paced learning, so students were from a professional background. Ultimately, I had to design opportunities for learners to apply their learning and receive feedback. Okay, so basically to understand the decisions that I followed, it really helps to consider the context in which this course was designed for. The course was designed for professionals, as I've said, with an interest in the history of Middle East. As a self-paced course, it presented a low-stakes opportunity to experiment with Gen AI in the ideation process. But ultimately, I also faced some clear self-challenges. Without an academic present to guide the learners, the design and the content itself had to deliver and provide meaningful feedback for the learner. Sustaining engagement also meant going beyond simple recall, offering learners scenarios that brought the content to life. And ultimately, these challenges directly shaped how I chose to bring Gen AI into the process. So the role of Gen AI was to produce first draft multiple choice questions and scenarios based on the content that the academic had already written. These were drafts that the academic could then review and refine. In practice, this meant quickly generating variations of scenarios, questions, and feedback, which the academic assessed using their authority and sensitivity that they have with their subject expertise. One particularly valuable contribution was the ability for Gen AI to generate detailed feedback for multiple choice questions. In a self-paced course, this feedback was critical. It explained to the learners why a question was right or wrong, and it also gave them a sense of the academic's presence throughout. Now, to see this in action, it really helps to look at one of the most distinctive features of the course's design. I proposed embedding low-stakes, scenario-based multiple-choice knowledge checks with detailed feedback throughout the course. The academic was quite enthusiastic about this idea, and ultimately these scenarios gave the learners opportunities to actively stay engaged. And ultimately what happened was they would, in one unit, act as a political advisor to the leader of the Ottoman Empire. In another unit, they would become a foreign service trainee, preparing diplomats for high-stakes conversations. And later, they would also step into the shoes of a senior political advisor to the Egyptian president. However, scenario-based questions can be quite time-consuming to create. And when the content is as historically and politically sensitive as this was, it requires very careful judgment, which is what made the collaborative relationship between me and the academic so important. Reflecting on this particular process, there are obviously some lessons to be learned and worth sharing. Firstly, Gen AI can accelerate the creative process during the ideation, but it is ultimately the human expertise that shapes drafts into the engaging and effective learning experiences. Researchers also found that Gen AI is a better starter than a project finisher. And this reflects the vital and ongoing contribution of both the learning designer and the academic needed throughout the learning design and course development process. Second, while Gen AI saved academic time, it also required significant input from me as the learning designer. I had to carefully refine the prompts, align the writing tone, and craft distractors that were genuinely challenging for professional learners. And finally, the real value lay in the combination of contributions. Gen AI provided drafts, the academic provided their subject knowledge and expertise, and I provided the pedagogical design and insight into the learners we were designing for. This balance allowed us to innovate during the ideation and into the storyboarding process as well.
while ensuring academic integrity, learning design expertise, and ultimately the learning experience needed to remain at the forefront. I'll now hand over to my colleague Preena, who will be presenting on how she created a custom GPT to empower learning designers to feel confident in their Gen AI.
I'm Preena, another learning designer from Kids Digital, and I'll be discussing our last case study today, which is about a custom GPT I developed to empower learning designers to feel confident using Gen AI as a collaborative tool, which ties in with our second core area as described at the beginning of the presentation. So first of all, a custom GPT in this sense is a trained learning design assistant based on a detailed prompt that I wrote. And the difference between a custom GPT and standard input is that with a standard input, you write the prompt each time you use it, whereas with a custom GPT, I've created a prompt that's running in the background so that the output is usually consistent, but it's good for repetitive tasks and it's just really quick to use, which is why it's good to try to empower learning designers to use Gen AI. So the task. So just to say what the task is, at production stage, the academic provides their content as a weekly handover. And one part of our process as a learning designer is that we review the handover and the feedback, and then we go on to the storyboarding stages depending on whatever we found in the handover. When working on a 10-week module, I noticed that my reviews are quite varied, and I was missing out on some of the higher level things. And so that's the reason, another reason why I developed this custom GPT. And what you can see on the screen are the differences in what I review when I'm looking at the handover and what the custom GPT would review. So mine is based on my knowledge, it's my experience working with the academics, with knowledge of what the previous weeks have held, and I'm putting that all together to give a much more detailed review of that handover, whereas the custom GPT is much higher level. It's based on the prompt that I've written, the documents that I've input, and it's more consistent. And so working together, the idea is that I have a more comprehensive review of that handover. What you see here now is the prompt that I input. You've got the 3 documents that I put in for the custom GPT to review it against, and then I put in an output of how I want the custom GPT to respond to me. And I use the craft framework that Wenjing referenced earlier in the presentation as well. So the way that the custom GPT works here is that the learning designer just has to put the handover in, send it through, and then they get the output. They don't need to write a prompt, they don't need to do anything, because all of that's running in the background from what I've written. And just to say, this is the second version of the prompt that I've written, and it's gone through loads of iterations, loads of tweaks, and actually I'd probably go back and tweak it again as well. So that's only part of the output because I couldn't put all of it on the screen. But you can see it's given me what I've asked for. I've got a summary, I've got the key strengths, and I've got the priority improvements that I asked it for. So that, in conjunction with my review, just gives me a much more comprehensive view of what that handover is. And then what I do after that, do I then send it back to the module lead with the edits that I want them to make, or do I then move on to the storyboarding stage? So it just helps with some consistency with that. And so to summarize all of this, an alternative use is that academics can use this custom GPT before they hand their content over to us. They can use it to review their content, to see if they've hit all of the markers, because the documents that I've input are the documents that we give them to use as their checklist, to give the guidance for writing their content, and it's got our learning design principles in there. So it's everything that we ask them to hit, and that's why they could use it before they hand it over to us and put their edits in against us. So going back to why I developed this, so along with the consistency with the handover, it's to empower learning designers to use Gen AI as a collaborative tool. And as we saw earlier in the presentation, learning designers at King's Digital still have some hesitancy about using Gen AI. And so this custom GPT is a really easy way of using it. It's for a task that we all do, it's repetitive, and it doesn't require much from them to use it. And using it in conjunction with the review that we usually do, it's preserving that human element, which is part of our approach to using Gen AI. Which is what I've said there. So our key takeaways and learning from this whole process so far is that even though we're using Gen AI, our learning design goals still remain the same. The quality that we produce, that academic integrity, students are still at the centre of our production. And our aim with Gen AI is to get the best out of us as learning designers whilst preserving the human element, and using Gen AI as a collaborative tool that replaces the fun stuff that we do, the creative stuff. It's there to use in collaboration to support the creativity that we can do, that I hope we showed you in some of the case studies. And Gen AI is developing at a really fast pace. What it is today is not what it was last year. Actually, when we started all of this, it's completely different. And so we're going to continue researching and testing ways that we can integrate Gen AI into our processes whilst maintaining our goals that were outlined at the beginning, and with a flexible approach that accommodates the different perspectives and appetites of learning designers, as again we outlined earlier. So thank you for listening. Does anyone have any questions or any ways that you're using Gen AI in your roles and that you'd like to share with us?